Start. Welcome to episode 24 of the Confident Carnivore podcast, where our motto is change your fuel, change your life. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm so excited. We have Scott Myslinski. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Janice. How are you?
Doing great. How are you today?
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on Confident Carnivore. We're super excited to have you. If people don't know, which I'm sure most everybody does, Scott is the what do we call you? The owner or the
Host.
the host? Thank you. The host of the Carnivore Cast podcast, which I've been listening to it for a very long time, and so I'm so excited to hear more about his podcast, his mission, and also just about Scott in general and his own carnivore journey. So to start, we're gonna actually show some before and after photos of
Thank you.
Scott.
I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. So Scott, do you want to say a few words about
Yeah.
your before and after photos?
So this is Skinny Scott back in 2016 pre-carnivore diet. My background. I'm 28 years old. In this photo, I guess I was 24, and I was a competitive lightweight rower. So that involved a lot of weight cutting, kind of like how you hear in other weight-based sports like wrestling or MMA or things like that. And so I had gone through a long series of caloric restriction and under eating, and had very little muscle mass. I may look like skinny and fit in this photo, but I think I was actually probably 20% body fat. I just had almost no muscle whatsoever because rowing was all about being as light as possible, having a lot of aerobic capacity, but not necessarily having big muscles. And so I shied away from weightlifting. I did kind of prioritize protein, but I was mostly eating kind of a standard American diet. A lot of, probably the healthiest thing I would eat was a lot of like Greek yogurts, the ones with a bunch of the fruit in them, like the whole Chobani craze. I had a lot of gut issues. My metabolism was pretty poor. I was pretty high stress, not sleeping well. I just wasn't happy with my satiety was a big thing. And so I was always looking for a diet where I could eat as much as I wanted, not get fat, and feel more satisfied during and after meals, and improve my muscle mass and lose fat. And my energy was also kind of poor, looking back at this time period. So those were a lot of the reasons for me for seeking out improvements in my diet and eventually trying the carnivore diet.
Wow. You look like you're in pretty good shape still. I'm surprised
Thanks.
you say that you don't have much muscle there. So is this carnivore?
Yeah, this is a couple years ago. At this point, I've probably put on 20 or so pounds of muscle. This is a wedding photo.
You got a nice V shape there. That's good.
It's just a well-fitted suit. Don't be fooled. This is like 3 years into carnivore, feeling a lot healthier, better digestion, better sleep, better performance in the gym, more muscle, less fat, eating a lot more, feeling more satisfied with my meals, having better energy and mental clarity, etc.
Oh, you look good. I mean, you look like a confident carnivore there. I like it.
And this is also this is, in my keto days.
Okay.
This would be back closer to 2016. I think I'm eating some like keto shepherd's pie in this photo. So I thought that would be entertaining for folks.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing those. And before we dive in, we're just going to share a couple of Scott's the website.
Yep.
For the podcast. So if you want to just, I think most people probably know you, but if you want to share a bit about just your podcast, your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Carnivore Cast is, we go deep on meat-based diets, keto diets, etc. I make the show all about the guests, so it's really not about me. It's never been about what is Scott's latest diet or what is Scott eating this week. And at this point have done over 150 episodes, one episode a week for for years now. And, the guests are a mix of experts, researchers, doctors, folks like that, as well as N=1 case studies, people who have relieved a variety of conditions like gout, you see there, with carnivore or keto-based diets. And so I really wanted to balance. Elizabeth Stern, another great example of an N=1
Oh,
person.
Brett.
Yeah, overcome major depression. So really, my goal with the podcast is just not to convince people they have to do a carnivore diet or tell them how to do a carnivore diet, but more open their minds that, a carnivore diet could help with some of these things that people are struggling with. And, if someone is listening to the podcast and, they hear about migraines, or they hear about IBS, or they hear about PCOS, or any of these conditions that they are struggling with, or a loved one may be struggling with, that maybe this podcast opens their mind to experiment, to try something different and see how it might help them.
Amazing. And I salute you for your dedication in producing all that content. That's a lot of episodes and one a week. It's just brilliant. So really, I mean, truly, it's such a huge contribution. And I listened to a lot of your episodes, especially when I was just considering, and and then you need to hear those reinforcements along the way. It's so nice to continue to hear people's stories and then hear all the experts. And okay, so your Instagram here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's Instagram is a bunch of food pics, obviously, it's a carnivore account. And then the episodes, and I try to share some recipes and some information in my posts. You can see a picture of my desk. I'm sitting at that right now, recording this. And my dog is right beside me. So that's a pretty appropriate picture.
So cute. Is it a golden doodle?
She's a labradoodle. Yeah.
A labradoodle. Oh, so cute.
Thank you. And yeah, podcasts are posted up there. I answer every direct message I get. I love hearing from people. So please feel free to contact me, share a story, share a question, anything I can help with. Love hearing from people.
Oh, thank you. All right. So there's just so much I want to ask you. So, I mean, okay, let's start out first though with your story. And then, of course, I would love to ask you more about the podcast and things. But so you said you're 28, right?
Yeah.
And how long have you been carnivore?
So I'm not a strict carnivore now. I've reintroduced other foods to my diet. I adhered to a completely strict carnivore diet for 3 years, from the fall of 2016 to the fall of 2019. No cheats, no keto foods, almost no dairy ever. And I cut out caffeine and coffee pretty quickly as well. And then since then, I've systematically reintroduced foods to my diet, and I eat a much broader diet now, still based around animal protein, still main focus of all my meals. But yeah, so it was strict carnivore for 3 years.
Wow. And so now you said you've first of all, what caused you to want to reintroduce foods, and then what kinds of foods have you reintroduced?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of a math problem where for me to maintain my body weight, I need over 3,000 calories a day, and I'm only 170 pounds. So I'm not a huge person, but I just have a really high metabolism. I walk a lot, I'm very active. And I found, after tireless experimentation and doing everything right, only eating, certain types of fat, only eating raw beef suet, having my meals in very particular ways, doing everything I possibly could, digestive enzymes, etc., that I really cannot tolerate more than 150 grams of fat per day for longer than 2 weeks at a time. I can do it for a few days, feel excellent, but like clockwork, every time I would do that at the 2 to 3 week mark, all of a sudden my body would just fight back, take revenge, and I would get excessive bloating and gas and start belching, start burping in the middle of the night, far away from my meals. And so what that meant is, if you just think about the math of 150 grams of fat, it's roughly 1,000 calories. That means I need to get the other 2,000 to 3,000 calories from protein, if I'm not eating any carbs. 2,000 to 3,000 calories of protein is like 800 plus grams of protein a day. that's just like really hard to eat, and it causes a whole lot of other problems. Like you have to pee all the time, including during the night. You're really, really hot, um, and just a bunch of other problems. Like I think protein is not a great fuel source. Protein is a building block. Everyone needs a certain amount of protein, but past that amount, fat and carbs provide the fuel we need. They're much easier for our body to use as fuel. So for me, it just basically got to a point where I couldn't eat enough food
Oh,
without having some of these negative side effects of either eating too much fat or too much protein. And so for me, what that meant is like starting in the fall of 2019, I very slowly and systematically reintroduced carbohydrate sources. And I did it basically according to the whole 30 framework of food reintroduction. So what I would do is I would pick one food, not a food group, one food, like honey or banana, not like fruit. And I would take 3 days of having one serving of that food each day. And I would track my satiety. I would track my digestion. I would track my energy, and some other things. And then I would finish that 3 days, and then I'd go back to baseline for at least a day. And then I'd reassess and either keep that food in or get rid of it. And then I test the next food. And so I went through honey, bananas. Then I moved on to things like, white rice, Greek yogurt, um, more types of fruit like berries, oatmeal, vegetables, and eventually more and more carbohydrate sources and foods. And got to the point where I quickly found out what worked for me and what didn't, and what made me feel good and what didn't. And I'm able now to get to the point where I can eat almost all foods, and I know the ones that don't do well for me. But
wow.
yeah, a lot of the foods that bothered me and gave me a lot of issues pre-carnivore are no longer an issue, which is really nice. And I'm able to eat enough food to maintain or increase my body weight when I need to.
Oh my God, this is blowing my mind. So because I remember there's a coach on MeatRx. She goes by the Realistic Carnivore. And she had mentioned that Judy Cho said that true healing was to actually be able to go to, say, France and have a baguette, because that would
Mm,
mean that you had healed your gut. And so,
mm.
so now you're saying you can pretty much eat most foods without too much trouble then, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, so what percentage of your plate then is still meat then?
Um, Percent of my plate. That's an interesting way to think about it. I don't know. I mean, I think at every meal I'm getting at least 30 grams of animal protein. So that's like a necessity for me. But on top of that, I might have a lot. I might have a little. I might have none. I might have a lot of carbohydrates too. Because now I'm eating, close to 5,000 calories a day. So you don't get to that without eating quite a lot of carbs, usually in the form of something more benign like white rice. I'm not out eating candy bars or things like that. But yeah, there's a lot more carbs on my plate now.
Wow. So do you think then that as long as you're not eating like processed foods and you're eating like, more natural to neutral foods, do you think that is the reason why so many people get really messed up because they're just eating the standard American diet? And I mean, it kind of sounds like you use carnivore as what they say, the elimination diet to heal, and then you're
Yeah.
able to reintroduce. So I've never heard anybody do this fully successfully in such a scientific methodical manner. So
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know, to be honest, why it's working better for me now than it was before. And I don't know why so many other people can't tolerate certain foods. I would say the way I view the carnivore diet now is it's the best starting point for almost everyone. I think it is an awesome elimination diet. I think everyone should at least try it at some point. And then there will be a lot of people who either want or need to stay there permanently,
Mm.
either because they have some type of autoimmune condition or they have bad psychological connection with carbohydrates or other foods, or they just feel their best, not incorporating other foods. Some people, don't even want to incorporate other spices or seasonings, which I think is great. I was there for 3 years and I thought I was going to be there for the rest of my life. But for certain people, they get to a point where they can reintroduce other foods. And if they want to, and if it makes them feel better, if it, increases their ability to enjoy food or be more social, I don't think you necessarily need to eat other foods to do those things, but it may help if for certain people. I think it's perfectly fine to try reintroducing those foods, and I'm not against it at all. I'm not dogmatic. I think you should do what works best for you. And I think the carnivore diet is a tool that a lot of people should and can use.
Wow, this is just amazing that you so can you compare a bit about just everything, your mental, emotional, physical, kind of spiritual health from being strict carnivore for 3 years to now, new foods, your energy, all of it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. So I'd say my digestion is better with the new foods just because I was having so many problems trying to push, um, my fat higher or my protein higher to get enough calories in. So I was running into problems. Even though my digestion overall improved on carnivore, it got to the point where I couldn't
Mm,
get enough calories in, and that's where
mhm.
my digestion started to suffer. I would say my energy is probably a little bit less stable with all the carbs, especially initially when I first reintroduced them. Dominic D'Agostino talks about this, that basically, when you haven't had carbs forever, like it was for me, 3 years, um, the blood sugar reactions and your insulin sensitivity, you'll have these blood glucose spikes, and it'll feel crazy. And a lot of people have that on carnivore. They actually have a piece of honey, or they test honey on one of these CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, and they're like, wow, look how much it spiked. Like, I felt like crap, like had a headache. I can never handle carbs. This is why I never eat carbs. And it's like, no, like actually, if you continued eating carbs for like a month, your body would adjust and it wouldn't be this blood sugar roller coaster that you feel right now, which is exactly what happened to me for the first month to 2 months. Reintroducing these carb sources, even with the more benign ones, and even in small quantities, I felt like my energy was all over the place. My cravings were all over the place. It was kind of scary. And I had moments where I went back to strict carnivore during the reintroduction. But now it is a lot more stable. I'd say I don't get the same like meat zen satiety after a meal that you have after having a nice big fatty ribeye or something like that, where you can just be like, so happy, I'm so full. But I don't have the crazy insulin and blood sugar spikes and dips. I have done a CGM through NutriSense, and I had the lowest standard deviation in my blood sugar they said they've ever seen,
Wow.
um, while eating like 700 grams of carbs a day. So yeah, I'm tolerating them very well. I'm obviously very active, very insulin sensitive. So things are working for me. My sleep is good. So overall, yeah, I think things are good. I felt like a superhero on carnivore. I feel like slightly less of a superhero with carbs. And definitely during the transition period when I was reintroducing carbs, I felt not great.
Wow. And then you're eating plants too, right? Do you
Yeah.
have any concerns about like the oxalates and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know, honestly, long term. I can't say for sure. I'd say I try to avoid foods that are like extremely high in oxidants. So I don't eat any nuts. Um, I don't eat huge amounts of like spinach or kale or things like that. I'm not like grinding up smoothies with a bag of spinach or something like that. So I am taking some of the things I've learned from carnivore and continuing to try to apply them. But I'm sure that my plant toxin load is higher now than when I was on a carnivore diet.
Wow. And so you said, I mean, you said you need these calories. What are you, so in terms of, you said you walk, and what else do you do for physical activities?
Yeah, so I typically walk 15 to 20,000 steps a day.
Oh,
A lot of that's with my puppy.
mhm.
I also lift weights 6 times a week. Um, yeah, that's about it.
Wow. So when you added the carbs in, because I mean, I think isn't that what they usually say for like bodybuilding that you actually do need to like carb cycle and all this kind of thing? What is has been your change in your strength and then your recovery since adding the carbs and that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. So I don't know if you need carbohydrates to lift weights or build muscle or anything like that. I'm pretty sure you don't, especially at a normal level. I'm not trying to be a pro bodybuilder or anything like that. Not no delusions of grandeur there, but yeah, I was lifting very intensely and building muscle and recovering super well on a carnivore diet. Especially once I figured out electrolytes and things like that. Um, I would say with carbs, I have a lot of energy and I'm able to build muscles, and my muscles feel very full. But I do get more sore than I did on carnivore, so there's probably more inflammation. But inflammation is also good in some sense. It helps you build muscle. You don't want to completely blunt inflammation. So yeah, it's overall hard to say, but I think there's definitely great examples of people who have built muscle without carbs, and you don't need carbs to build muscle.
Interesting. And I want to fast forward back a little bit more than before, because I know you were eating the standard American diet, right? Like around, and then you started rowing, you said 15 or
I started rowing when I was in eighth grade.
okay.
So yeah, it would have been around the age of 15, something like that. And then I rowed competitively for 8 years. Uh,
Wow. So what was I mean, when you were growing up and, it sounds like you were eating kind of like junk food from what I heard.
yeah,
So what was your overall, were your moods and it sounds like you weren't very muscular, but what were you
yeah,
like when you were on the standard American diet?
yeah. I'd say my mood, I had a lot more mood swings and I was more emotional. Um, Definitely a lot more emotional and energy swings and crashes pre-carnivore. I was also using a lot more caffeine um, and things like that. And I mean, what mostly motivated me to change my diet was, I stopped rowing and I didn't want to get really fat.
Mm,
So I said, how can I stay in shape and be healthy? And at the time, this was around 2013 when I stopped rowing. I was looking at things like paleo and slow carb from Tim Ferriss. This was before keto was even close to popular. And I started doing intermittent fasting. And then I found Sam Feltham from Smash the Fat over in the UK, and started discovering some folks over here, Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, doing things closer to keto. And it kind of happened into keto style diet. Um, and then eventually made the hop to carnivore in 2016 when I heard Amber O'Hearn on the Two Keto Dudes podcast,
mhm.
uh, talking about how plants are not necessary and may even be harmful. And she was citing how a lot of the same epidemiological evidence that we know is not great, that demonizes eggs and saturated fat, meat, is the same evidence that promotes plants and the necessity of plants and how vegetables are healthy. And so that really made me question what I was doing. And at the time, I was eating pretty heavy keto. I was basically eating keto, but not tracking protein at all or fat. And so I said, you know what, I can stand without having avocado and nuts and, the occasional vegetables on my plate. I'm just going to eat a ton of meat and see how I feel. And gave it a shot. And this was way pre Sean Baker and Paul Saladino and all the awesome resources that exist today on how to do a carnivore diet. So I did it in a lot of pretty stupid ways. I made a lot of mistakes, things I would not recommend. But it's still, despite doing it poorly, I noticed a lot of improvements.
Wow. So now, I mean, you've gone through the keto space, you've gone through carnivore, and now you're eating more variety. So, what do you think the role of fat is then? Do you still think like fat is still important?
Yeah, I think fat's super important for hormonal health and overall health and vitamins and your body regenerating its own systems and being a building block. And I think if you're not eating carbohydrates or if you're eating very few of them, it's a super important energy source. I think no one should be on a protein only diet. That's kind of like hormonal and health suicide. So I think fat is super important. I think of fat and carbs as interchangeable fuel sources, and depending on your goals and your context and your preference and how you tolerate those two different macronutrients, you can kind of choose between them. But I think you have to have protein. Everyone needs protein. I think a gram per pound of body weight is a great starting point for most people. And then I think after that, filling your plate with either fat or carbs for your fuel source makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I'm wondering how has your experience of food changed now? Because you went from being so strict and it's like, are you enjoying food more? Do you get obsessive about it? Or are you just like, now are things easier? What is it like now?
Yeah, I think my perspective on carnivore changed a lot. Like on carnivore, I got rid of all my cravings. I stopped viewing non-meat foods as food. I saw them as like almost cardboard, just like not edible things that had no appeal to me whatsoever. I was never using willpower or discipline to try to get rid of foods. And I'm not saying that to brag or anything. I'm just saying like it's interesting intellectually how that experience changed. And then reintroducing them, I don't really get strong cravings for anything. So having that like emotional tie to food and craving for food, like I did before carnivore with carbs, that doesn't really exist. I do enjoy the foods while I eat them. Like I do enjoy eating rice with some sauce on it, or some oatmeal with some 0-calorie sweetener in it and some fresh fruit. Like that is enjoyable to me, but I'm not like craving it. And I'd say I do feel more like robotic around food, almost in a sense, less of an emotional tie to it.
And do you think that gain of being more robotic about food, that shifted when you went carnivore and you've just maintained that now, right? That kind of like,
Yeah,
that's good.
I think so.
That's probably helpful because I think the thing about carnivore, that one of the things I like the most is just the simplicity
Yeah,
and the time freedom and the mental freedom of not constantly obsessing about food and is this
yeah,
good for me? Is this bad for me? But it sounds like you've maintained that kind of, food is fuel. Food is not about me sitting around watching Netflix for 10 hours and getting comfort from it, right?
yeah. I feel in control of my food and my food choices. I think that's the best way to put it.
That's excellent. And I think I love what you're saying, because especially in the MeatRx community, I hear people, whenever people start to say, oh, they want to reintroduce certain foods or try different things. Or I really love Renee because she's a coach, and she's the realistic carnivore, because she has this open mind about trial and error, and that, like I said, the ultimate goal being to heal enough that you can partake in other foods that are available to us. I mean, we have abundance, right? So I just really like that you've gained a lot, it sounds like, from your carnivore experience, but now you can actually have an even better relationship with food in some ways, right? Because
Yeah,
you can enjoy more, but not stress,
yeah, yeah,
So I think some people, I mean, I know I've always obsessed about food, and I like what you said about that. Some people just do need to be more strict about it, and that's just what's true for them. And, they should just, I mean, I think that spectrum is really nice that you're offering, that it's like, well, I mean, didn't Michaela Peterson even add back? I think she added back tea and chicken, right? I think.
mm,
So I actually like to hear when people say that they're able to successfully enjoy something without having
yeah,
to feel so limited.
yeah,
But it's neat that you said you didn't really feel limited during carnivore either,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. I never felt limited at all, actually. Um, I loved every meal on carnivore.
Yeah.
Food was great.
Do you get flack from people about your reintroduction of new foods?
No, I honestly don't. Again, like the podcast has never been about what is Scott eating or anything like that. I think the most I get is like actually from non-listeners of the podcast, like family members and friends. They'd be like, "Oh, that's super interesting." Like for so long, they knew me as the guy who ate only meat, and who would go to a restaurant and like order the steak with nothing else and order 3 of them or something like that. So they're like just very intrigued. They're like, "Wow, why did you do that? How do you feel?" And so I try to explain it to them, but yeah, no one on the podcast or listeners or things like that have given me flack about it. I don't go and try to like advertise like, here's my meal with all these carbs I'm eating or things like that. And I purposely don't do like days of eating or anything like that, because I think people come to me to learn about the carnivore diet and feel connected to the carnivore community. So I'm not lying to them. I'm not telling them like I am a carnivore, blah, blah. I'm very open about how my diet has changed, but I'm not going to advertise like all the new foods I'm eating in their face and parade it in front of them, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And do you get it now that you've reintroduced carbs, do you get cravings for like just kind of like non-healthful foods? Like, like just for me, if I reintroduce anything, like if I'm not 100% carnivore, then I start just getting wicked cravings for like, just
Yeah.
sugar, fast food, potato chips. Do you have those types of cravings at all?
No, I don't. Honestly, the deepest cravings I get are for like a big fatty ribeye.
Oh, there's
So
nothing
it'd
wrong
be
with
like
that.
cravings to go back to carnivore.
Oh,
Those
wow.
would be my strongest cravings.
That's fascinating. And is it okay to ask about, your wife? Because you said
Yeah,
she's,
absolutely. Yeah,
so
sure.
how does that work out with you? She's carnivore fully then, right?
So she's reintroduced more keto foods more
Oh,
recently, but she was a very strict carnivore for over a year, and she needs to be a lot more careful. She can't reintroduce a lot of the foods I'm eating, um, and she prefers to keep her carb count super low. So she had digestive issues, Crohn's-like symptoms, IBS for a long time. Spent a lot of time with a lot of doctors. All of the food said food is not part of the problem, which really didn't make any sense. And she, found a lot of relief from going strict to carnivore, and has found that she um, thrives on a meat-based diet, but can now introduce certain foods. And she did a lot of the systematic testing, like I did, which really helped her. And helped her identify certain vegetables and fruits, which really are problems for her. But similarly to me, just cutting out coffee made a huge difference. We both
mm,
switched to caffeine pills at one point, which made a huge difference in our digestion. And then I eventually cut out the caffeine pills entirely, just to help with
wow.
my sleep.
Wow. And is it true that is your doggy, is she a
Yeah, she's a
carnivore?
strict carnivore. Oh yeah, she eats. We feed her raw. So she eats. I swear she eats better than a dog in the world. She's a princess. But she eats raw tripe, which is like the stomach lining, mixed with meat, mixed with bone, and uh, like I said, there's some minerals in there, but it's basically all raw meat. And then we give her the occasional raw bone to gnaw.
Oh,
And then for treats, we use Grassland Nutrition out of Australia. They have freeze dried little liver, kidney, or heart chunks, and she loves those. She goes crazy for those. So yeah, she eats like a queen. She does very well.
she's a confident carnivore canine, huh?
Oh yeah, she is.
So
Yeah, very well
cute.
put. Yeah.
Oh, and so has she been carnivore since she was a puppy then, or?
So the breeders we found are amazing, and part of what made us really excited is they feed their puppies a mix of raw and regular food. So no
Mm,
matter where we got our dog from, we were going to transition them to raw right away when we got them. We knew that. But what was nice is she was raised on a mix of like Stella and Chewy's, which is like kind of a high end, a freeze dried raw dog food. And if you feed your dog raw, but you use the freeze dried foods, it's like $30 a pound or like $50 a pound. But we buy the actual like raw meat, which needs to be frozen, and then you defrost it in the fridge, and then you like section off a certain amount. That's like $2 or $3 a pound. So we were lucky enough to be able to find someone to supply that in our local area. But so long story short, she was raised on a mix of like the Stella and Chewy's plus raw meat plus like a little bit of yogurt. And so she adapted to the raw meat like super well. And it's funny, like if you drop like a piece of carb food or like broccoli or anything on the ground in our kitchen, she'll like look at it and be like, what is that? She's really picky eater. I think because we feed her raw. And another thing that's interesting is now I'm just ranting about dogs, but she has this really bright red coat and her color is so thick and her hair is so healthy. And we get compliments on it all the time because most doodles, golden doodles and labradoodles, if you see them out, just like try to pay attention. If you see these types of dogs, they kind of like fade
Yeah,
and their hair gets like kind of white-ish as they get older. Her hair has gotten like more vibrant and more red. And I think it has to do with the food we're feeding her. Her coat just looks like super healthy and luscious. And a lot of dogs will, like, when they get out on the grass, they'll like scratch their back, and you think they're just having fun scratching their back. A lot of times it's because they have like really, really bad skin problems. It's kind of sad.
oh,
And I think a lot of that comes from feeding dogs grains, which they're even less well adapted to eat than us as humans. So
wow.
she's been very healthy. Her digestion is incredible. All her bones, she's never had any issues with anything. She's extremely smart. So I think it's making a huge difference.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing. And I love dogs. And, Aaron lives at
Yeah.
the Santa Cruz Harbor. And so we see a ton of golden doodles and labradoodles. My cousin also has one. And you're right, they look all faded. Their
Yeah.
hair gets all like kind of like frizzy, and like that's how I look when I was a vegetarian. My hair was all faded and like frizzy,
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
It's
that's
amazing.
so inspiring that I really want to I every time I see a dog now, like when we know the people, I try to push for having them go carnivore.
Yeah.
And we actually have this lady next door. Aaron lives on a boat at the Santa Cruz Harbor, and there's this lady next door who has a dog named Pignon. And I guess the dog was having really bad health problems. And so she started feeding the dog ribeye only. And
Mm,
the dog just loves it and
that's amazing.
made this miraculous, healing recovery. And we're like, why don't you try the ribeye? Like you're feeding Pignon the ribeye, and the
Yeah.
dog is thriving now. And it's like, why don't you try eating one for yourself?
Yeah. It's a lucky
But I
dog.
love that. I love that yeah, we saw in the picture that she looks so like vibrant. I mean, I thought that was a filter that you had applied to make her look extra like red like that. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
um, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm just thinking, I wanted to hear about like what's next for you in terms of like where are you heading with the podcast? And I know you have a new podcast that's coming. So
Yeah.
can you share what's next for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Janice. So the podcast is still going strong, pumping out one episode a week. I'd love to have you on, by the way.
Oh,
So we should do that very soon. But yeah, one episode a week, keeping up with that commitment. For me, it's just about consistency, staying engaged. Not a whole lot new with regards to any new types of like memberships or services or products or anything like that. Just trying to keep the content exciting and engaging. And always love hearing from people and love hearing people who want to come on or people who others want to hear on the podcast. I've had some fantastic interviews lately, just great conversations. So that's continuing, and folks can check that out. Just search Carnivorecast. And then I am starting a new podcast, not relating to health and nutrition, at least not directly. It's going to be called Making a Man. And it's going to be on topics of masculinity and manhood, which are less talked about or more taboo. Things that I want to learn more about selfishly and want to have conversations about. So it's going to include things like fatherhood and relationships and sexuality and self-identity and body image, hormones and men's health and hair loss and all these addiction types of topics. And I'm going to have a lot of carnivores on just because a lot of these people have been male role models for me, and I think can speak to a lot of these topics. But yeah, it's going to be a diverse set of topics, and if anyone's interested, would love to have you come listen. The podcast isn't live yet, but it's Making a Man, so you can just search that. And makingaman.co is the website, but more to come there.
that is so brilliant. And I feel like probably women, I mean, I'm certainly curious about all those topics. Like, I really followed Jordan Peterson really closely, and I think it was so amazing if you could get him on the
Yeah,
show.
dream guests. There are a lot of dream guests.
Well, I think you could probably bring a lot back that you've already had, right? And
Yeah.
I was actually just a friend of mine, Jackie Jones, recommended that I listen to your episode that you did with the Human Unleashed project.
Yeah, yeah,
And that was so mind blowing. I mean, I feel like there are so many other dimensions beyond food, and I wanted to ask you, after listening to that, I thought, oh my gosh, there are so many other practices, right? Like
yeah,
earthing and, looking at the sun and all of these different things.
yeah.
Of all these interviews you've done, what of those types of lifestyle practices have you implemented?
Yeah. Um, so I'd say one thing that I've learned from interviews, it's a little bit different than the lifestyle practices. I'll answer that question too. But one thing I learned is just everyone has their own issues and their own baggage and like so much hardship and challenges in life that you should always assume the best from people and always try to be empathetic. You never know, what they might be going through with a loved one or family member or struggles in their own life. I have so much love and empathy for the people who have suffered and have come on my show to talk about it. So that's one. That's just kind of a life lesson. But yeah, so I think for me, some of the things outside of diet that are super important are one, sleep, absolutely essential. I'm obsessed with sleep, probably to my own detriment. I do everything I can to try to improve my sleep. Another is sunshine. I think the sun is just so important for our health, way beyond what you can get in a vitamin D pill or having bright lights or even a window in your room. It's helpful, but it's not the same as actually being out in the physical sun. And so I try to get sunshine in my eyes as early as I can in the morning. I take walks outside. I try to be outside as much as I can on the days that I can. It gets cold here in Boston, but try to make it work. So those are really huge for me. Some of the other things, earthing. I love to be outside in nature and do things in nature, but that one's a little less practical for me, especially living in the city. I don't have a backyard I can just walk out in barefoot.
Mm.
I would love that.
Yeah.
But I also, do some small things like red light therapy is helpful for me, especially at night to kind of calm me down. Meditation is huge. So I'd say those are some of the things I regularly practice. I know there's a whole lot more, and the Human Unleashed guys are absolute experts in that. But for me, those are the ones that are like kind of minimum effective dose, biggest bang for my buck.
Wow, that is brilliant. I'm inclined to agree with all of those. I haven't really done the red light therapy, but I think that's so. You no cryotherapy for you then?
I've tried it. I don't do it regularly, but yeah, it's been really fun. Each time I've done it, it felt really good. So if I had regular access to one, I probably would.
Wow. Well, so you've done so many interviews, and it sounds like you've kind of culled the things that are your essential practices. Do you ever feel like you get overwhelmed by, I mean, because I feel I was very similarly just in the few episodes that we've done about really that you really get a deep sense of empathy because you never know. I mean, when people you see all these people and you think all these people we've met have gone through such huge hardship and suffering, and they've had to develop this resilience to overcome these horrible things, and it's like it's so common, like you realize, wow, that's actually not, that's the norm
Yeah,
mostly, that people
yeah,
have not come out unscathed from physical or mental conditions or trauma.
yeah.
But do you ever get overwhelmed by that input of just,
Hmm.
so much knowledge, so much, learning about people's stories?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's always good to like step back and have some perspective and revisit like, hey, where am I? What is working for me? And try to think about like incremental change. It's really easy to like listen to podcasts and be every single show be like, oh no, like I'm doing everything wrong. I need to try this new thing, or I need to, throw out everything I know. But I try to take kind of an educated and mature approach to saying like, hey, this is what works for me. Like this podcast is interesting and raises some new questions and maybe some things I can add to my routine. Like, recently I've added more yoga or certain types of movement or things like that from certain podcasts I've listened to. But I try not to let any one interview or data point or expert make me overhaul everything I know or everything I'm thinking.
That's really great. I mean, that's really balanced because you do want to stay true to yourself and
Yeah.
know yourself, because
Yeah.
I think that's an important point because there's just so much information available. Like I can sit on YouTube and watch thing after thing after thing after thing,
Exactly.
and then you get to the point where you're not really present in your own life and
Yeah.
you can't think for yourself. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate your very balanced and grounded perspective. So
Thank you.
so I think the last thing I'd love to ask you is just after going through your whole journey of, going really strict carnivore for 3 years, and then, you did keto, you did paleo, and now you've reintroduced foods. What would you tell somebody who is just newly approaching or considering the carnivore diet?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say a few tips. One is don't undereat. So don't try to jump into the carnivore diet thinking it's a weight loss diet. Eat as much of the foods you want until you're full. Eat the foods you enjoy. Um, I think people go into it trying to be too extreme, trying to say, I'm only going to eat grass-fed, grass-finished steaks of this kind at this time. I'm doing OMAD. I'm fasting 5 days a week. I'm doing CrossFit. I'm going to do caloric restriction, like all these things. Just make it easy for yourself. Make every step you take a home run. Make it a layup. And that will make it so much better for you long term. If you just continuously get a little bit better in steps that are easy to take, in a year you will be so much better off. So one is like make it easy and eat enough. Two is find community, whether it's through podcasts, Facebook groups, YouTube, something else. Just find people who can answer your questions, who can support you, who can make you not feel like a freak or an outlier for trying this diet. And then three is like be patient and be honest with yourself and give it an honest try. And don't necessarily follow someone else's template or switch things up too quickly. Just give it an honest shot for 60 days or however long you think you can commit to, and be honest with yourself. How did it work? How did it make you feel? And don't give up if you make a small mistake. If you have a piece of dark chocolate, or you have an avocado, or you have a keto pizza or something like this, it doesn't mean you're not a carnivore anymore. Like, you're still carnivore in my book. You're not kicked out of the carnivore camp. We're not vegans. We're not that dogmatic. So keep it going. Be honest with yourself. See how you feel. Find that community. Eat enough. And yeah, I think the world is ahead of you.
Thank you so much, Scott. That's really great advice. And thank you so much for coming on the show. This has
Of
been totally
course.
brilliant and enlightening, and you've opened my mind yet again. So
Absolutely. My pleasure. You're a great interviewer, Janice. Really appreciate it.
thank you, Scott. And best of luck with your new podcast. We'll include all of your links and everything for people to reach you and follow you. So have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Thank you,
Thank
Scott.
you.
Bye.